After a long day of grueling sea battles for survival, salt stinging their eyes, arms aching from oar and axe, and the cries of combat still echoing in their ears, the Viking men came home. Their ships cut through the twilight waters like ghosts, weary sails sagging, hulls slick with the brine of the open sea and the blood of conquest. As they stepped onto the rocky shore, boots meeting the earth with the finality of survival, the longhouse awaited them like a silent sentinel. The Vikings lived by firelight and shadow, and as smoke curled upward into the beams of the longhouse, it drifted through the smoke hole like a slow prayer to the gods. The last light of day faded beyond the fjord, slipping through the wooden slats, soft and golden like the breath of Freyr. Inside, no one hurried. The day had passed. The night belonged to silence. The sea is asleep, its waves slow and rhythmic. The sky is bruised with dusk. The air smells of pine and salt. Your home, not in a house with locks and walls, but a longhouse, its wooden ribs creaking softly, alive with breath and heat. Inside, it's dim. The only light comes from the fire, golden, flickering, soft as memory. There is no pressure to sleep, no routine to follow, no blue light warning you to put the phone away. The children are curled near their mothers, the elders lie on furs, and a warrior, whose muscles still ache from rowing, lets out one long sigh before the weight of the day carries him into stillness. The Vikings didn't chase sleep, they sank into it. The quiet wasn't eerie. It was a sign the land approved, that the spirits were resting too. You see, in the Norse world, sleep wasn't a performance or a productivity tool. It was what came after you lived with purpose, after you hunted, after you worked the field or forged the iron. It was earned, and so it was deep. They did not fear silence. They did not fill it with noise. They did not flinch at the creak of wood in the night. The stillness of the fjords taught them something we've forgotten. Rest isn't something you do. It's something you return to. And in that cold northern world where the sun sometimes vanished for months, darkness was not the enemy. It was a friend, a signal that it was time to let go, to drift, to vanish into warmth and breath and story. This is how the Vikings began their sleep, not with struggle, but with surrender. The Vikings did not lie awake, staring at the rafters, begging their minds to be quiet. Sleep was never something they had to earn with hacks or supplements. It came to them like dusk came to the mountains, slowly, steadily, without resistance. Because in the world they built, there was no reason to fight rest. There was no war against their own thoughts, no battle with blue light, no obsession with 8 hours. There was only the body, the fire, and the earth. A Viking didn't schedule sleep. It simply followed the rhythm of the day. They rose when the sky lightened, when the smoke drifted upward from the hearth, and the frost on the grass began to melt. They worked the land, shaped iron, hunted, rowed, cooked, hauled, lived, until the sun bowed and the shadows grew long. They didn't rush into rest. They slowed into it. And as twilight filled the longhouse, the world outside dimmed and quieted. There were no clocks, no alarms, no pressure, just firelight and the smell of wood smoke, the sound of wool being folded, of low voices, of stew cooling in the pot. This, for them, was the language of rest. The whole village wound down together. Sleep wasn't a solo mission. It was a shared descent into stillness. They didn't ask, "Am I doing it right?" They simply lay on their furs, warm under the weight of cloaks and pelts, and drifted. Their minds weren't racing. Their bodies weren't confused by artificial light or stimulation, because nothing in their environment told them to stay awake. There were no false suns glowing in their hands, no endless scroll of stories to compare their lives to. The day ended, and the body listened. And here's something else. They didn't fear the dark. Modern minds often panic when the lights go out, as if silence means something's wrong. But for the Vikings, the dark was natural, expected, and even comforting. It wrapped around them like the walls of the longhouse. It marked safety. Darkness meant the world outside had calmed, that no raid was coming, that no storm howled at the door. They embraced it. The Norse had a word, vila, which meant to rest, to lie, to be quiet, not to fix or optimize or improve, just to be. And in that word is a truth we've forgotten. Sleep is not an achievement. It is a return to balance, to breath, to the body. The Vikings didn't struggle to sleep because they never taught themselves to fear it. They didn't think of it as a break from life. It was part of life, as essential as eating, as natural as snow. They did not chase it. They did not fight it. They let the day carry them to its end and trusted the night to do the rest. Before pillows, before mattresses, before electricity, there was fire. It wasn't just heat, it was life. And for the Vikings, it was the silent guardian that watched over every night's rest. Inside a longhouse, fire didn't crackle wildly like a bonfire. It pulsed gently in a stone-lined hearth at the center of everything. The flames were low, calm, steady, never completely gone, even in sleep. A Viking fire was never left to die. It glowed like a heartbeat, casting golden light onto timber walls and slumbering faces. The Vikings didn't just sleep next to fire. They slept with it, as part of their rhythm, their shelter, their silence. Every longhouse was built around this flame. It warmed the cold air that swept in from the north. It dried damp boots and softened pelts. It was used to cook meals, boil water, and heat iron. But at night, its job changed. It became a beacon of peace, soft light that danced across the beams and soot-darkened rafters, giving the mind something to settle into. In a world without electricity, the fire was the only glow. It didn't overstimulate. It didn't blind. It flickered and faded in waves, inviting the eyes to rest, not fight to stay open. The children would lie nearest to it, bundled in wool, watching the flames blur as they drifted off. Warriors who had returned from sea would stare into its heart until their thoughts disappeared into embers. And in those final minutes before sleep, the fire said something no words could. You are safe. Because the Vikings understood something we've forgotten. Sleep begins in the body's belief that it can let go. The fire, tended carefully, ensured that. It held back the cold. It kept predators cautious. Its smoke curled slowly into the air, lifting into the night and out through a small opening in the roof, like breath rising from a sleeping chest. They didn't need noise machines or blackout curtains. They had flame and shadow. And when the fire's light turned red and the coals pulsed gently beneath ash, they knew it was time. But it wasn't just practical. The Vikings believed fire had a spirit, something sacred, almost living. They didn't toss it wood carelessly. They fed it with intention, respected its silence, and understood that it saw everything. Fire was their oldest companion, their protector, their witness. So as sleep came, it wasn't into darkness alone. It was into warmth, into trust, into the steady glow of something ancient, something that watched over them since the first night their ancestors lay down beneath the northern sky. The fire did not speak, but it told them, the day is done. You've worked hard. You are home. And with that, the Vikings slept. To us, darkness is discomfort. To the Vikings, it was a familiar friend. In the north, the sun doesn't always follow the rules. Winter nights stretch for months. Light becomes a luxury, not a guarantee. But the Vikings didn't fear the dark. They belonged to it. They didn't reach for lamps. They didn't light every corner. When night came, they let it in. Slowly, naturally. It wasn't something to banish. It was something to welcome, like snow or silence or sleep itself. Inside the longhouse, shadows crept up the walls as the fire settled low. Light and dark weren't in conflict. They danced. The Vikings watched this shift with calm acceptance. They knew that rest did not need brightness. It needed safety, warmth, stillness. Darkness provided that. In their stories, the night was filled with creatures and gods. There were wolves that chased the sun, spirits that walked beneath the moon. But these weren't bedtime monsters. They were part of the world, respected, not feared. The Vikings didn't imagine evil lurking in the dark because they didn't teach their children to dread it. Instead, they taught them how to live with it, to move through it, to trust it. Darkness taught the Norse people patience. It slowed them, softened them. It signaled the world was resting, the land, the sea, the spirits. And so should they. They didn't cover their windows. Most longhouses had none. Outside was the forest, the snow, the stars, or the pitch black of clouded sky. They didn't need to shut it out. There was nothing to shut out. Night wasn't the enemy. It was the other half of the day. Imagine lying there, wrapped in fur, your breath visible in the cold air, your belly full of barley stew. The fire still glows, faint as a memory. Around you, others are sleeping, their breath deep, their bodies still. Outside, the world has vanished into dark. No noise, no glare, no pressure to stay awake. And so, you let go. You close your eyes, not to escape, but to join something larger. The hush of the forest, the quiet of the sea, the slow rhythm of the north itself. To sleep well, the Vikings didn't need light. They needed trust. Trust in the world, trust in their shelter, trust that the darkness was not out to harm them, but to hold them. This is what we've lost, not just darkness, but peace with it. We flood our homes with brightness, thinking it keeps us safe. But the Vikings knew better. Light wakes the eyes, but dark soothes the soul. And so they slept, not in fear of what they couldn't see, but in comfort, knowing they didn't need to. It was never silent in a Viking longhouse, but it was always safe. The longhouse was the beating heart of Viking life. Long, low, and dark, it was made from timber and turf, built to withstand the storms of the north. But more than that, it was a place of closeness, of family, of warmth, of sleep. At night, it became a cradle. There were no bedrooms, no separate spaces for each person. Everyone, warriors, mothers, children, elders, slept under the same roof. A single fire burned at the center, smoke rising up through the roof hole. Along the walls were raised wooden platforms, layered with straw, sheepskin, and thick wool blankets. These were the beds, not soft, not private, but deeply comforting in their own way. To sleep in a Viking longhouse was to sleep with others. The warmth of bodies replaced the need for thick walls. The soft sound of breathing filled the dark. There was always someone nearby, a brother, a wife, a child, and this closeness bred calm. You were not alone. You were not unguarded. You belonged. And that belonging made rest easy. Even the sounds of the night were familiar. The slow crackle of the fire, the creak of the wooden beams, the quiet shuffle of someone turning over, the distant howl of wind outside. Nothing loud, nothing sharp, just the music of life winding down. No one lay awake scrolling through worries. There was no screen light flickering against their faces, no intrusive notifications pulling them back from the edge of sleep. The Viking night was uninterrupted, undisturbed. Sleep came naturally in the longhouse because the body understood this is where you rest. There was rhythm to it, too. The fire would be banked just before sleep. the air would cool. Voices would lower. There might be a final murmur of story, a tale of gods or ghosts. But then silence would settle. The kind of silence that only comes when people feel safe enough to stop talking. And then stillness. The Vikings believed in strength, but not in pushing past exhaustion. They worked hard, yes, hunted, forged, rode, but they also knew when the day was done. They didn't glorify overwork. Rest was not seen as laziness. It was survival. It was wisdom. It was part of the cycle. In the Longhouse, this cycle played out every night. Sleep came not as escape, but as return to the fire, to the kin, to the earth. So if you ask, how did the Vikings sleep so deeply? The answer is simple. Together, with fire, with trust, and without ever needing to chase it. The Vikings didn't have a word for insomnia. They didn't need one. They didn't lie awake wondering if they'd get enough rest before dawn. They didn't count hours, chase supplements, or track their sleep cycles on glowing screens. There were no pills, no white noise machines, no pressure. And still, they slept, deeply, easily, night after night. Because in their world, sleep wasn't something to solve. It wasn't a problem, and it wasn't something you could do wrong. It simply happened. Like the tide, like the wind. And the Vikings knew how to let it. They weren't obsessed with rest. They respected it. That's the difference. Sleep was not earned through perfection or performance. It followed a life lived in rhythm with nature. Work at sunrise, food when hungry, rest when tired. There was no anxiety wrapped around sleep because there was no artificial life wrapped around their days. Think about it. They didn't overstimulate their brains before bed. They didn't scroll through endless information. They didn't sit beneath buzzing lights until midnight. They didn't worry about the idea of sleep. They just lived, and sleep followed. There was no fear of lying awake. If they did, they lay still. Let the fire comfort them. Let the cold air fill their lungs. They weren't told they must sleep or else they'd suffer. That kind of pressure didn't exist in their minds or their world. The Vikings lived by what we now call circadian rhythms, but they didn't study them in labs. They just listened to their bodies. They rose with the light, worked with their hands, moved their muscles, ate from the land. By nightfall, the body wanted to sleep, not from stress, but from purpose. And because no one told them they were bad sleepers, they weren't. Today, we've turned rest into a battleground. We overthink it, measure it, worry over it. We try to hack it, squeeze it in, and feel guilty when we can't master it. But the Vikings didn't chase rest. They built lives that invited it in. They were tired from real effort, rowing across fjords, chopping wood, herding sheep, mending sails. Their bodies weren't restless from sitting all day. Their minds weren't buzzing from digital noise. Their eyes weren't strained by artificial light. When they lay down, they dropped into sleep like a stone in water. No drama, no tricks, no pressure. They trusted the dark, trusted their shelter, trusted their bodies. And in that trust, they found something we've lost. A peace with rest. A stillness without force. A night that needed no fixing. That's why the Vikings didn't need pills. They didn't need anything, except the fire, the dark, and the silence to begin. Before electric blankets and memory foam, there was wool and fur, and the deep, grounding comfort they gave to a Viking at rest. There was no fluff in a Viking bed, no layers of soft plastic or chemical-scented sheets. What they had was better. The weight and warmth of the land itself, the animals they raised, the hides they tanned, the wool they sheared. Everything they slept under came from the world around them. And that weight, it mattered. Vikings didn't pull a thin blanket over themselves and call it rest. They burrowed beneath layers of thick sheepskin and heavy woven wool. The furs were real, sometimes still carrying the scent of the animal. And when you pulled that over your shoulders in a longhouse cooled by northern winds, it held you. The modern world is just rediscovering what the Vikings already knew. Weight comforts the body. It settles the nerves. It tells the brain, you're safe. You don't need to move. You don't need to run. We now market weighted blankets as a sleep aid. The Vikings just called it blankets, and they weren't sleeping in silence either. The longhouse would creak in the wind. The fire hissed as it sank. A child might murmur. An animal shifted nearby. But those familiar sounds, paired with the pressure of fur and wool, didn't disturb rest. They deepened it. When the cold pressed in from outside, the weight of what they wore and what they slept under reminded them they were protected, held, anchored. Fur cloaks became blankets at night. Wool tunics became pajamas. Everything was reused, reworn, relayered. This wasn't luxury. It was survival, turned ritual, and every night it signaled the same thing. The work is over. Lie down. Be still. This physical comfort mattered. The Vikings were not sentimental about rest, but they were serious about it. They knew that if you didn't sleep well, you didn't hunt well. You didn't fight well. You didn't live well. So they didn't cut corners. They layered their beds thick. They covered their children with skins. And they let the dark and the cold become a backdrop to the warmth they created. It wasn't fancy. It wasn't soft. But it was real, and it worked. Because when you lie beneath something that once breathed, once moved, once lived in the same cold wind, you feel something ancient stir in you. A connection, a grounding, a sleep that comes not from escape, but from return. Return to the body. Return to the earth. Return to a kind of rest no machine can give. Before sleep, there was fire. Not a lamp, not a screen, not a bulb humming with blue light. Just fire, alive, quiet, flickering, the last companion of the Viking day. Every longhouse had a hearth. It wasn't just for cooking. It was the soul of the home. And at night, when the outside world turned to frost and shadow, the hearth still glowed. Dimmer now, softer, like a heartbeat in the dark. The Vikings didn't rush to put it out. They let it fade slowly, and in that fading, sleep began. This stillness around the fire was sacred. It wasn't loud. There were no arguments, no plans, no chores left to finish. The day's work had already been done with full effort. What was left now was the ritual of slowing down. The simple act of sitting by the fire, staring into its flames, not needing to say much at all. That moment, that quiet surrender, was the transition. We now speak of wind-down routines. The Vikings didn't use that term, but they had one, built into the very structure of their life. And at the center of it, fire. Its light didn't jolt the senses. It soothed them. It moved in rhythm, unpredictable, but slow. No two flames ever danced the same way, and watching them gave the eyes a way to rest, the mind a way to wander gently into dreams. For children, the fire meant story. A tale from an elder, a whispered saga of gods and giants, maybe a reminder of the ancestors who once sat in that same circle. For the weary, it meant a place to sit and warm the bones. For the anxious, though few would name it that, it meant something constant, alive and within reach. As the fire burned lower, so did the body's pulse. There were no alarms set, no final check of messages, just the slow progression of night. And when the fire reached its last embers, it was time. Not because the clock said so, but because the world had shown you. The Vikings didn't fight against the dark. They didn't banish it. They let it come. Let the fire mark the boundary between day and sleep. And in that glow, they found something modern life often lacks. A clear, natural signal that it's okay to stop, that you've done enough, that you can let go, that nothing more is needed tonight. And so they would stretch out on the raised platforms, furs pulled over them, the fire casting shadows on the beams above, and sleep would come, not forced, not chased, but welcomed, in the presence of fire, in the absence of pressure, in the stillness they trusted. The Vikings didn't wake up to an alarm. There were no buzzing phones, no blaring clocks, no calendar apps telling them they were already behind. The sun was their signal, and their bodies were the timekeepers. They rose when the light returned, slowly, quietly, with purpose, but never in panic. In the world of the Vikings, time moved differently, not slower, but deeper. It followed the rhythm of the land, not the tick of a second hand. There was no concept of being late to your own life. When the dawn crept through the slats of the longhouse, when the roosters crowed or the livestock stirred, that was enough. The world was waking, and so would they. This kind of waking matters, because it shapes how you sleep. When you don't dread the morning, when there's no rush waiting on the other side of rest, your body doesn't tense before bed. It doesn't brace for the jolt. It releases fully, trusts the night to be long enough, good enough. The Vikings had no set bedtime, no digital reminder to start winding down. They simply followed their senses. When the fire dimmed and the body sagged, they slept. When the light returned and the animals stirred, they rose. There was no guilt if they woke in the middle of the night. They didn't label it insomnia. They just sat near the hearth, maybe tended the coals, maybe whispered with whoever else was awake. And when they were ready again, they slept more. The modern world has chained sleep to productivity, every hour measured, every moment judged by how efficient it is. But the Vikings didn't sleep to be productive. They slept because it was right, because it restored them, because the body asked for it and they answered. There was no counting hours, no sleep scores, no wearable tech to calculate their rest. Their bodies told them what they needed. And because they listened, their rest was real. A Viking day began with purpose, but not pressure. They would rise, stretch, maybe chew dried fish or flatbread. The chores would come, milking, mending, gathering, rowing, but not with panic, with rhythm, with repetition, with the kind of flow that lets rest return easily at night. They didn't obsess over their sleep, and that's why they slept well. No one was counting down how many hours were left before they had to wake up. No one feared the morning. And that freedom, that absence of pressure, made all the difference. Because when there's no clock hunting you, there's no reason to run. And when you don't run from rest, you fall into it. The nights were cold, sometimes bitterly so. But that's exactly why the Vikings slept so deeply. They didn't fight the chill, they embraced it. The Viking longhouse was built to block the wind, not to seal in summer. It breathed. Gaps in the wood let air drift through. The central fire gave warmth, yes, but the air still cooled as the night deepened. The result? A room that stayed cold, not freezing, but brisk enough to settle the body. And that cold was no enemy. It was an ally. Modern science has only recently confirmed what the Vikings already lived. Cool temperatures help the body sleep. A drop in body temperature signals the brain to release melatonin. That hormone makes you drowsy, pulls you toward rest. So while modern homes crank the thermostat, the Vikings had the perfect conditions built into their world. Thick wool cloaks, animal skins, layers of fur. These kept their bodies warm, but their faces still felt the crisp air. Their breath fogged softly in the night. Their skin tingled just enough to make the blankets feel like a haven. That contrast, cold air, warm covers, wasn't discomfort. It was pleasure, the kind that settles deep in the bones. And when you sleep in cold air, wrapped in weight and warmth, your body stops fidgeting. You don't toss. You don't overheat. You just sink. They didn't rely on artificial comfort. They trusted the seasons. In summer, the long northern light kept them awake later, working, feasting, living. But in winter, the darkness returned, long, deep, slow, and so did sleep. They followed the land's rhythm, not a schedule. And when winter came hardest, with snow against the longhouse walls and ice forming at the edges of water jugs, the Vikings didn't panic. They slept better, longer, deeper, because nothing outside demanded they rise at dawn. No cold office, no online meeting. Just survival, and the knowledge that rest was part of that. So the cold, far from being a burden, became part of the ritual. It meant you drew the fur closer, you tucked in tighter, you pressed shoulder to shoulder with family. And when your breath came in slow, visible clouds, it was a sign. You are alive. You are safe. You are resting like your ancestors did before you. That cold wasn't a threat. It was a message. Slow down. Go still. Let the warmth you've built carry you through the night. Even warriors must sleep. And in the Viking world they did, deeply, deliberately, and without apology. Vikings were feared for their strength, their raids, their battles, their brutal efficiency on sea and land. But what most forget is this: their power was restored in silence, in rest, in nights wrapped in fur and quiet. A Viking warrior didn't rise to sharpen his blade without first sharpening his body. And that meant sleep, not as weakness, but as preparation. Their days were full, rowing for hours across black water, hauling timber, forging weapons, trading, defending, hunting. No movement was wasted, no strength left unused. When night came, it wasn't just a break. It was a necessity, a ritual. They didn't romanticize exhaustion. They didn't idolize the grind. They knew that no sword arm stays strong if it trembles from sleeplessness. No mind stays sharp if it's frayed from unrest. Rest was not the reward. It was the fuel. And so, after the fire dimmed and the longhouse fell into shadow, the warrior lay down not in armor, but in trust. Trust that the night would hold, that his kin stood watch if needed, that the gods favored the brave and the wise. And the wise slept. They didn't fear stillness. They honored it. Muscles softened, minds unwound. No battle songs, just the quiet breathing of men and women who'd given their strength to the day, and now gave themselves to the dark. And it wasn't always in beds. Sometimes it was under the stars on the ground, beside the boat pulled ashore. Wrapped in cloaks, lulled by waves or wind, they surrendered to sleep wherever it found them. But even then, it was deep, because it was earned. This was not lazy rest. This was warrior rest, the kind that repairs the tendons, reknits the spirit, prepares the heart for what tomorrow may demand. Even the great berserkers, wild in battle, feared across kingdoms, knew the value of stillness. Their rage was not endless. Their bodies needed anchoring, and that anchoring happened in rest, in dreams, in silence. In modern life, we glorify sleeplessness, hustle harder, grind now, rest later, but the Vikings would have laughed at that. You can't swing a sword if your hands shake. You can't lead a raid if your mind is fogged with fatigue. Rest was part of the fight, not separate from it, not lesser than it. And so the warrior slept, not because he was weak, but because tomorrow he would rise again, stronger, steadier, sharper, not in spite of rest, because of it. The Viking night didn't belong only to warriors and elders. It belonged to the children, too, and their sleep was sacred. In the longhouse they lay closest to the warmth. Tucked between fur pelts and woven wool, children drifted off surrounded by stories, not screens, by the hum of voices, the crackle of fire, the steady breathing of family all around them. They didn't fall asleep alone. They didn't need lullabies from machines. They had sagas, tales of Thor's hammer striking down giants, of Odin's wisdom, of sea serpents and brave kings. These weren't fairy tales. They were truths, lessons woven into myth. And as the children's eyes began to close, these stories wrapped them up like another layer of fur. The Viking child didn't resist sleep. Sleep was adventure. Sleep was safety. Sleep was trust. They fell into it not with fear, but with belonging. And in their sleep, they dreamed not of monsters under beds, but of gods, ancestors, and wild fjords. Sleep wasn't a battle. It was part of life, as natural as breath, as certain as the stars above the thatched roof. There were no separate bedrooms, no glowing toys, no overstimulation. The day gradually dimmed into night, and children dimmed with it. They were never pulled from play into sleep by force. They slid into it, gently, like canoes onto water. And if they stirred in the night, there was always someone nearby, a mother's arm, a brother's warmth, a father's quiet snore. They weren't told to go back to sleep. They felt safe enough to return on their own, because sleep wasn't a punishment. It was comfort. It was home. Even the harshest northern winters couldn't shake their rest. The longhouse was a cocoon, and for children, that closeness to fire, to kin, to rhythm, became the very structure of their sleep. Regular, restorative, deep. We chase that now with gadgets and guides, apps that promise to fix what we've lost. But the Vikings never lost it, because they never separated sleep from life. They didn't teach children how to sleep. They simply let them live the way humans were meant to, close to the earth, close to each other, far from the noise. And so the Viking child grew strong, not just in body, but in rhythm, because sleep wasn't trained. It was inherited. A gift passed down from one generation to the next, inside a longhouse glowing softly with flame. They were children of the night, not afraid of it, cradled by it. The Vikings didn't just sleep. They listened to what their sleep told them. In the still hours of night, dreams weren't dismissed as nonsense or fantasy. They were taken seriously, as signs, as warnings, as whispers from the gods, or glimpses of what lay beyond the veil of waking life. In the Viking world, dreams spoke, and the wise listened. A warrior who dreamt of waves swallowing his ship might stay ashore. A farmer who dreamt of a dying tree might look more closely at his crops. A mother who dreamt of a glowing child might offer thanks to Freya or Frigg for the health of her kin. These weren't idle stories shared over breakfast. They were messages, sometimes divine, sometimes ancestral, always important. Dreams were a bridge between the living and the dead, between men and the gods, between now and what may come. The seers and the vulvas understood this best. These women, often feared and revered, could read dreams like runes. In the deep hush of the longhouse or beneath stars beside a fire, they listened to others recount their sleep visions and offered interpretation. A raven in the sky, a wolf in the distance, a ship with no sail. These symbols held meaning, and even those who weren't trained in Cedar, Norse magic, still knew. The night had a voice, and it spoke through dreams. Modern people wake up and swipe away dreams like emails, something to forget before the coffee brews. But the Vikings, they remembered. Sometimes they acted on what they saw. Entire voyages were delayed because of one dream. Marriages, battles, and trade could all be swayed by what the dream world delivered. because they knew the mind doesn't rest just to recharge. It reaches, it listens, it connects to something more. Even the sagas, those mighty Viking stories passed down across generations, often begin with a dream, prophetic, mysterious, ominous. A king sees his own death. A woman sees fire sweeping over land. These weren't creative flourishes. They reflected belief, a core truth that sleep could reveal what waking eyes missed. And so sleep was more than recovery. It was revelation. To sleep like a Viking is to believe that rest holds power beyond rest. That in those quiet hours, something speaks back. Not always clearly, not always kindly, but always with meaning. You didn't need a priest. You needed silence, darkness, trust in the dream, because the Vikings knew the gods may not walk among you in the day, but at night they might visit your mind. Every Viking longhouse had a fire at its heart, not just for warmth or cooking, but for something deeper, a rhythm, a presence, a protector of the night. It didn't roar. It glowed. Long after the evening meal was finished, the fire remained, pulsing low and steady like a second heartbeat in the room. Its light flickered against wooden beams and fur-lined walls, casting shadows that danced slowly as the flames ebbed. This wasn't chaos. It was calm. It was peace. The fire didn't need to be tended constantly. A Viking knew its voice, the crackle, the hiss, the shifting coal. These sounds weren't background noise. They were sleep's lullaby. Imagine it. You lie on thick pelts. Your skin still tingles from the cold. Your body aches in a good way, from work well done. And in the center of the dark room, a soft orange glow moves like breath. Not too bright, not too dim, just enough to remind you. You are safe. You are home. The fire kept predators away, both animals and men. But more than that, it gave the mind permission to let go. The dancing light lulled the eyes. The warmth soaked deep into bone. And the sound, that slow, rhythmic cracking, was the sound of the world winding down. To sleep beside a flame is not to fear the night. It's to become part of it. The Vikings knew this. The flame wasn't just physical. It was spiritual. Fire was sacred, a gift from the gods, a link to the ancestors. The hearth wasn't just where meals were made. It was where stories were told, where babies were born, where bodies were laid before burial. Life circled around the flame, and so did rest. When the storm howled outside, the fire stayed. When the world grew cold, the fire held. It was the still point, the anchor. Modern homes have electric light, cold, constant, unchanging. But the Viking flame danced. It had life. It had soul. Watching it, your mind slowed. Your breath followed it. Your thoughts began to drift like smoke. It was hypnotic, not like a screen, not like a stimulant, but like a tide that pulls you under gently, with purpose. Even today, people sleep better after sitting by a campfire. Our bodies remember what our minds forget. We were made to sleep near flame. The Vikings never lost that. So when the day was done and the sky had gone black, the fire did not sleep, but you could. And that was enough. Because the flame would keep watch, as it always had, as it always would. Before the Vikings closed their eyes, they listened, not to noise, but to silence. Real silence. Not the hum of machines, not the distant drone of traffic, not even the ticking of a clock. Just the breath of wind outside the longhouse, the faint whisper of the fjord beyond the trees, the soft exhale of water against stone. That stillness wasn't emptiness. It was presence. It was the sound of the world at rest, and the Vikings were tuned to it. Many of their settlements sat along fjords, deep, narrow inlets carved by glaciers, where water stretched dark and cold between towering cliffs. These waters were silent sentinels, At night, they did not roar or crash. They waited, still, watching. To fall asleep beside a fjord was to feel the vastness of the world pressing in, and to be at peace with it. The Vikings didn't fear the stillness. They craved it. After the clang of iron, the grunt of labor, the roar of feasting, there came the quiet. And they didn't fill it. They let it settle over them like mist. Because in that stillness, something important happened. The mind slowed down. Without noise, without interruption, thoughts softened. The chaos of the day smoothed into rhythm, and that rhythm led to rest. Even the animals knew. Horses quieted, dogs curled up, chickens ceased their clucking. The world around the longhouse obeyed the silence of night. The Vikings honored it. No shouting, no banging, just the hush of sleep preparing to take over. And there was something else. The fjord held memory. Many had sailed down those waters, chasing trade, conquest, glory, and many had not returned. The silence of the fjord carried weight. It held stories, echoes. It reminded those who slept that life was fragile, and that rest was not weakness, but wisdom. So they slept deeply, not because they were lazy, but because they knew. You don't enter battle unrested. You don't carve a future while half awake. You must have the stillness. You must respect the night. Modern life is loud, constant, unyielding. But the Vikings had a secret. And it wasn't hidden in a potion or a practice. It was in the air, the water, the silence. The stillness of the fjord was not a thing they added to their lives. It was their life. And in that stillness, they found the kind of sleep we can barely imagine now. The kind that doesn't need fixing. Only listening. The Vikings were warriors. That's how we remember them. Axe in hand, shield raised, charging into legend. But what we forget is this. They didn't fight all the time. They rested. And when they did, they rested hard. Between raids, after long voyages, or during the deep winters when no ship dared sail, the Viking warrior returned home, not to stay sharp, not to train endlessly, but to recover. And in that recovery, sleep was sacred, because they knew something many have forgotten. Rest is part of the fight. Muscle is not built in battle. It's built in sleep. Clarity of mind doesn't come in blood and adrenaline. It comes after, in the stillness, in the healing hours when the body stitches itself back together. When a Viking crew returned from a raid, their longship dragged ashore. Wounds bound with rough cloth and pine tar, they didn't leap into the next task. They ate, they drank, they slept. For hours, for days. In shifts at first, while others kept watch. But eventually, when the threat passed, all would lie down under the same roof. And the sleep that followed was deep, absolute. The kind that only comes when the body has spent everything and demands its return. They didn't shame sleep. They didn't call it weakness. They knew a tired man dies faster in battle. A weary mind sees fewer traps. Exhaustion kills warriors long before the enemy does. So they respected the pause between storms. Even in the sagas, heroes don't leap from one battle to another. They rest. They fall asleep beside their swords. They sleep beside fires and in mead halls, in silence and in song. The great Odin himself, god of war and wisdom, took time to sit, to dream, to wait. Because the wise warrior doesn't just train the body, he preserves it, through food, through quiet, and through rest. Modern culture celebrates hustle, grind, no days off. But the Vikings, who faced real life or death battles, didn't live that way. They had intensity, and they had recovery. Both were necessary. Both were powerful. To sleep like a Viking warrior is not to collapse from exhaustion. It's to enter sleep with intention. To let the day go. To allow the body to mend. To let the mind sharpen through stillness. because the next fight will come. It always does. But the strongest warrior is the rested one. Not every Viking night ended beneath a roof. Some nights ended beneath the open sky, stars cold and sharp above, earth damp and silent below. And in that vastness, the Vikings did something most of us have forgotten how to do. They slept with the world, not apart from it. During long voyages, when the sea stretched endlessly in all directions, Vikings curled up on the decks of their ships, cloaks pulled tight, shields stacked as makeshift walls. The stars above were their only ceiling. No electric light, no hum of civilization. Only the slap of water, the creak of wood, the breath of the wind. And they slept. Other nights found them on land, camped deep in forests, along mountain trails, beside fjords or rivers. Their heads rested on packs or stones, bodies wrapped in wool and fur, fire glowing low nearby. Above them, the constellations they knew well, the ones that guided their voyages, moved slowly across the heavens. The Vikings understood the stars. They didn't just use them for navigation. They read them, respected them, trusted them. To sleep under them was not terrifying. It was grounding. Imagine this. The night is cold. The fire has faded to coals. Your limbs ache from a day's march. And above you, endless black sky, filled with quiet light. You breathe in, and the scent is pine, moss, salt. You breathe out, and the mist of your breath drifts upward toward the stars. There is no roof, no door, but you are not exposed. You are held by the land, by the night, by the sky itself. That kind of sleep isn't fragile. It's earned, and it's deep. Modern life wraps us in walls and insulation, sealing us away from the world. But the Vikings didn't see nature as something to block out. They lived in it, moved with it, slept beneath it. They knew the cold teaches the body to harden. The wind teaches the mind to calm. The stars remind the soul of its place. And when you lie beneath them, truly still, truly present, something ancient stirs. A peace not born of comfort, but of belonging. The Vikings belonged to the land, to the sky, to the rhythm of night and day, dark and light, movement and rest. And so, under stars they slept. No ceiling, no noise, just breath and sky and sleep. And in the morning they rose, not stiff or weary, but renewed. Because some of the deepest sleep doesn't come from a bed. It comes from remembering that you're a part of the world, not separate from it. When the longhouse dimmed and the fire burned low, it wasn't the warrior who brought peace to the night. It was the hearth wife. She didn't wear iron. She didn't row the longship. But her power was unmistakable. She kept the heart of the home. And because of her, the Vikings slept deeply. Before sleep could come, the longhouse had to quiet, and it was she who brought the quiet. The hearth wife was no servant. She was a leader, a protector of rest. And every evening, her rituals shaped the mood of the house. She stoked the fire, not to blaze, but to ember, warm enough to comfort, dim enough to calm. She murmured to the children, hushed the animals, sealed the doors against wind and snow. She didn't just prepare the home for sleep. She summoned it. In Viking society, roles were clear, but never small. While men hunted or raided, women sustained the rhythm of survival. And when darkness fell, it was often the hearthwife who knew what the household needed: silence, warmth, safety. The right tea made from herbs she gathered herself. A low song, a firm word to those who would stir too late. She held the line between day and night. And the warriors, they trusted her, because she guarded the part of life they couldn't, the stillness. She gave them space to rest, to recover. She gave them permission to let go. Even the gods honored the feminine role in sleep and home. Frigg wife of Odin, was the goddess of foresight, of domestic wisdom. She saw what others missed, and she, too, kept the fire lit and the night sacred. Inside the longhouse, it was not just about survival, it was about rhythm. The hearthwife knew how to close the day, how to slow the breath of the home, how to protect the sleep of those who must rise strong. She was not just a wife. She was the keeper of peace. In modern times, we often separate sleep from family, from home. It becomes an individual act, a solo struggle. But the Vikings knew better. Sleep was shared. The household moved together, lay together, breathed together. And the one who knew how to hold that space, to soothe the warrior, hush the child, tend the coals, was the hearthwife. She didn't need armor, she had presence, and through her the home rested. When you imagine Viking sleep, don't just picture the warrior. Picture the woman behind the fire, quietly powerful, holding the night in her hands. To the Vikings, dreams weren't just fragments of the mind. They were messages from beyond. They believed dreams could see what waking eyes could not. A warrior's fate, a coming storm, a betrayal, a blessing. All could be whispered into the sleeping mind if you were brave enough and wise enough to listen. Sleep wasn't just a time to rest, it was a time to receive. In Norse culture, dreams were taken seriously. Some were simple, memories stirred by firelight and mead. But others felt different, vivid, heavy, laced with symbols, ravens, wolves, shadowed roads, bleeding stars. These were not to be ignored. A chieftain might call the seeress, the vulva, to interpret such dreams. These women, trained in the ancient arts of cider, Norse magic, would listen, consider the signs, and speak of what was to come. Their words could change the course of voyages, or of lives. In the sagas, dreams foretell everything from death in battle to divine favor. The great hero Sigurd dreamed of wolves devouring his kin. King Harald Fairhair dreamed of a tree growing from his wife's womb, a symbol of a dynasty. And even the gods were not above dreaming. Odin himself sought wisdom through sleep and sacrifice. But these dreams weren't random. They came when the body was quiet and the soul was open. Vikings created conditions for such dreams. They slept close to nature. They lived in rhythm with the world. Their sleep wasn't disrupted by artificial light or noise or endless distraction. When they lay down, they didn't scroll through chaos. They closed their eyes to silence. And in that silence, the visions came. Some Viking warriors would even sleep on burial mounds, places where the dead were thought to speak, hoping for guidance in dreams. Others fasted or drank herbs known to open the inner eye. They did not fear dreams. They honored them, because to them the boundary between the seen and unseen was thin, and in dreams that boundary vanished. Today, we shrug off dreams, dismiss them, but to the Vikings that would be foolish. Dreams could warn, dreams could bless, dreams could prepare you for war. And when you slept with respect, when your sleep was deep, clean, earned, your dreams were clear. That was the gift of Viking sleep, not just rest, but revelation. So when a Viking closed their eyes at night, they didn't just drift, they entered the unknown. And sometimes the unknown whispered back. To the Vikings, death was not an end, it was a passage. And with it came the deepest sleep of all, the long rest. But this wasn't a rest filled with sorrow. It was sacred, honored, prepared for with reverence, because how a Viking died and how they slept in death told the story of how they had lived. When a warrior fell, whether in battle or from age, their body was not discarded. It was laid out with care, eyes closed, arms crossed, weapons beside them. as if they were not dead at all, only sleeping, ready for a journey far beyond this world. In some burials, they were placed in boats, real or carved from stone, to carry them across the seas of the afterlife. Others were buried beneath great mounds of earth, curled like sleepers, wrapped in furs and cloth, with the fire of their deeds still fresh in the minds of those left behind. This was not fear. This was respect. The Norse believed in many resting places. If you died in battle with honor, you might be taken by Valkyries to Valhalla, where Odin welcomed you among the chosen, a warrior's heaven. There you would feast and fight and rest each night in peace, a sleep filled with pride and purpose. Others might find their way to Folkvangr, the field of the goddess Freya, another honored resting place where the dead could finally lay down their swords. But for those who died quietly, farmers, mothers, elders, their rest was no less meaningful. They became part of the land, part of the memory of the home, their sleep watched over by their kin and by the spirits of the earth. Even the tombs themselves were built to reflect the calm of rest. Stone chambers like longhouses of the dead, quiet, still, eternal. The Vikings treated their dead like sleeping giants, not to be disturbed, but to be remembered. Graves were visited, offerings were left, and in the hush of night, stories were told. Here lies Jorund, who never fled from fire or blade. Here sleeps Solveig, whose hands healed and whose voice stilled the storm. Death was the final chapter in a life lived fiercely, and the sleep that followed was not one of weakness, but peace. Today, we fear death. We hide from it. We try to delay it. But the Vikings accepted it, prepared for it, and gave it dignity, because they believed that the way you rested in the end reflected the way you had moved through the world. And so they laid their dead to sleep, not in despair, but in honor, not in silence, but in story. Because in the Viking world, even death was a kind of homecoming, and the long rest was richly deserved. When winter descended on Viking lands, it didn't whisper, it howled. The snow came thick and relentless, blanketing fields, sealing longhouses, turning the world to ice and shadow. And in this cold silence, something ancient stirred. The Viking people slowed and slept. The winter sleep was not laziness. It was wisdom, a surrender to the season. The Vikings didn't fight the cold, they moved with it. And in doing so, they discovered one of the deepest, most healing forms of rest known to man. Life in the north was hard. The summers were brief and bright, filled with sailing, harvesting, building, and war. But winter was long, dark, and unforgiving. It demanded a different rhythm. So the Vikings adapted. The days became quiet, the work lighter, the nights longer. They rested together in the warmth of the longhouse. This wasn't just sleep. It was communal hibernation, a time of stories, silence, and deep slumber. They slept for longer stretches. Not always through the entire night, but in phases with periods of wakefulness for warmth, intimacy, or quiet reflection. They called it first sleep and second sleep. In between, they might share a tale, stoke the fire, or simply lie still. It was natural, restorative. And, unlike us, they didn't punish themselves for it. They didn't call it insomnia. They called it life. The longhouse made it possible. Thick walls, packed with moss and turf, a central hearth radiating warmth, furs piled high, people and animals sleeping close, body heat shared, the cold held at bay. Outside, the wolves might howl, the snow might bury the path to the fjord, but inside, the Vikings slept. This seasonal slowing wasn't seen as weakness. It was necessary. It was part of the sacred cycle, summer to fight, winter to heal. It was in winter that children grew, that old wounds mended, that dreams came clearer and minds quieted. Even the gods of the Norse myths embraced winter slumber. The great serpent Jormungandr coiled beneath the sea in cold silence. Odin wandered the world, wrapped in cloak and thought. The earth rested, and so did its people. We've lost this rhythm. Now we push harder in winter. We light artificial suns. We drown in deadlines. But the Vikings knew, when the snow falls and the sky darkens early, it is time to sleep, to gather, to dream. Not because you're weak, but because the world is turning. So let the fire burn low, let the wind howl outside the walls. Pull the fur to your chin, and sleep not in defiance, but in honor of the season. The Vikings did, and in that stillness they became strong again. In the Viking world, the land was alive. Every hill, forest, and fjord held more than stone and soil. It held spirit. And when the Vikings slept, they did not do so alone. They believed the land watched them, protected them, sometimes warned them. Sleep was not simply a biological need, it was a sacred act of trust between human and earth. The Norse had a word for these spirits, landvetir, the whites of the land, invisible, ancient, and powerful. Every region had its guardians. They lived in the rocks, the rivers, the trees, and when a Viking laid down to rest, they often did so with a quiet prayer or offering to these unseen watchers. It wasn't superstition, it was respect. Longhouses were built with care, aligned not just for warmth or shelter, but to avoid offending the spirits of a hill or stone. Before settling a new area, the Vikings would ask the land permission through rituals and signs. And when they slept under its roof, they understood. They were guests of the earth. This made their sleep feel different, more rooted, more secure, because the land wasn't something to conquer, it was something to live with. Even travelers, far from home, would seek guidance from the spirits of foreign lands. They'd sleep close to old trees or calm lakes, believing that the place itself could offer protection or punishment. In Iceland, the belief in huldufólk, or hidden folk, persists even today. These beings, closely tied to nature, are said to dislike loud machines, disrespect, or disruption. In the old days, a restless sleep or bad dreams might be blamed not on stress, but on disturbing a spirit's peace. Vikings made peace with the land before closing their eyes. Some buried food or left stones in cairns as offerings. Others whispered thanks before lying down. And when they dreamed, they sometimes saw visions tied not to their own mind, but to the place where they slept. The land, they believed, could speak through dreams. Modern minds might dismiss this. But consider, when you camp in a quiet forest or sleep beside a river, doesn't something feel different? As if the place itself has a mood. The Vikings noticed that, and they honored it. This connection brought deeper sleep, not just because of safety, but because of belonging. They weren't separate from nature. They were woven into it. The rustling wind, the breathing earth, the watchful spirits, all formed the cradle they rested in. We sleep now in concrete boxes, far from soil and stone. But the Vikings knew, the closer you are to nature, the more peacefully you sleep. Because when you're in harmony with the land lets you rest. A Viking warrior feared no man, but he respected rest. To fight well, one had to sleep well. And though the image we carry of the Norseman is often bloodied and wild, what's often forgotten is this. Even the fiercest Viking needed peace at the end of the day. The warrior's rest was sacred. After battle, after training, after the long marches across frost-covered valleys, warriors didn't collapse. They prepared for sleep. They tended their wounds. They removed their armor. They sat by the fire and drank from horned cups, not just to celebrate, but to come down from the chaos of war. And when it was time, they surrendered to sleep fully. No guilt, no rush, no shame. The longhouse welcomed them, its beams blackened by firelight, its floor covered in straw and furs. The warrior would lie down with his brothers, close enough to hear their breathing, their dreams, their quiet murmurs. That togetherness gave safety, and safety gave sleep. The axe might still be within arm's reach, but the mind was at peace. Why? Because in Viking culture, sleep was not the absence of action. It was the fuel for it. A tired warrior was a dead one. A restless mind was vulnerable. So they made space for rest, just as they did for weapons. Sleep wasn't weak. It was part of strength. And their bodies reflected that. Hardened by work and cold, yet trained to listen to the season, the hour, the silence. When it was time to act, they acted with fury. But when it was time to rest, they let go completely. The warrior's rest was also spiritual. Vikings believed their dreams could be messages from gods, ancestors, or even omens of future battles. A warrior who slept well might wake with more than strength. He might wake with vision. The sagas tell of warriors who foresaw danger, betrayal, or opportunity in dreams. These weren't dismissed. They were discussed, taken seriously, honored. Because a dream seen in the right state of rest could be a gift from the beyond. Imagine that. Warriors not just sharpening blades, but also seeking stillness. Resting not out of exhaustion, but as preparation for greatness. Today, we glorify grinding, hustling, sleeping less to do more. But the Vikings, men who faced blades, beasts, and the open sea, understood something we've lost. Without rest, you fall. With it, you rise. So they honored the quiet after the storm. They laid down beside the fire, and they let the world fall silent. Because tomorrow, they might fight again. And when they did, they would be ready. We chase sleep now like a thief in the night, tracking it with apps, hacking it with pills, forcing it with routines. But the Vikings, they never chased sleep, they welcomed it, because they remembered something we forgot. Sleep is not earned. It's given. By the world, by the body, by time. The Vikings didn't treat rest as a luxury. It wasn't some reward at the end of productivity. It was woven into life, like firelight into the longhouse walls, like moss into the timber seams. It was natural, expected, sacred. They knew when to rise and when to slow, when to sail and when to stay. They trusted the rhythm of the earth, the tilt of the sun, the hush of winter, the glow of embers. And when night came, they didn't fight it. They joined it. Now, we sleep behind glass and wires. We flood the dark with electric light. We punish stillness, fill silence, outrun exhaustion. We've made sleep complicated, fragile, even shameful. But for the Vikings, it was simple. You eat, you work, you watch the fire die, and you sleep, deep and unafraid. They didn't lie awake thinking about sleep. They didn't question their value while resting. And they didn't try to control every second of their night. They surrendered to it. And in doing so, they tapped into something we've buried beneath alarms and screens. True rest is not just physical. It's ancestral. The longhouse is gone now. The snow-covered fjords stand silent. But the wisdom remains, etched into sagas passed in whispers from wind and stone. We may not hold axes or feast beneath carved beams, but we can still remember. We can darken the room. Let the fire glow. Let the night come without resistance. We can trust our bodies. Listen to silence. Feel the weight of the day settle and fall away. The Vikings knew the cost of exhaustion, and they knew the power of recovery. They rose with strength because they honored their need for sleep. So what did we forget? We forgot that sleep is not a modern problem. It's an ancient gift. And to reclaim it, we don't need hacks. we need to return to the longhouse, to the fire, to the rhythm, to the rest.